When on the topic of indigenous culture, it is rather atypical that people discuss those of Europe. There are a number of reasons for this, as Europeans have historically mistreated those indigenous peoples encountered in the Americas and elsewhere during times of colonialism. Furthermore, the contact between Europeans and these various groups often saw their culture vastly altered by actions of globalism and assimilation. Though many have felt the massive effects of imperialism, lots of groups managed to retain much of their identity, customs, and culture, oftentimes being changed to exhibit attributes of their original culture, as well as those acquired from outsiders. While the colonial empires of Europe would be the classic example of this, there are a number of examples of European cultures that experience the same thing, of course varying in extremity. There are many historical instances of such. One such instance comes from a more obscure people of Europe, the Finns. Located in northern Europe, they are often heavily associated with the other peoples native to Finno-Scandia. Once compared to the other Nordic countries, it quickly becomes very apparent how vastly different they in fact are. This will be an in-depth look at the indigenous Finnish religion and culture, how it has survived to the present, and how it has been altered by a number of forces throughout history. While the Finns may often be seen as a sort of black sheep, there's actually an extensive world of people groups that are of relation, most of them being geographically positioned more near Finno-Scandia and the Ural Mountains. Contrary to popular belief, the Finnish language and culture are wholly of Uralic origins, a factor that is important in determining their diaspora. Before there was a distinct and common Finnish identity, the land was separated into a number of tribes who shared a very common language and cultural heritage. There are a number of these groups, but they can all be categorized in a certain way. The Hamalai set of the south and west, better known as the Tavasts in Swedish, Karelians of the east, and the Sami of the north, who are culturally similar but are considered wholly different. In isolation, these cultures developed for a time, eventually allowing for the formation of a common Finnish identity around their ethnic tradition of a Uralic, nature-based culture. There are four major key factors to indigenous Finnish culture: a belief in spirits that reside within nature and animals, the concept of ancestor spirits in the afterlife, an oral tradition of Finnish myth and spell, and a way of life closely connected to nature and based almost entirely on self-sufficient agriculture, hunting, and fishing. There is a main theme around these common beliefs. This is the eternally rotating world and struggle between life and death, order and chaos. This is illustrated and symbolized in their religious stories. There is some variation as to what the creation of the world looked like to the Finns. One major commonality between the two stories is the involvement of water birds and the primeval sea, first one being the earth diver. This is the myth in which a water bird dove into the primeval sea and brought up land. The second story involves the cosmic god Vainamoinen, more commonly told and accepted. This story involves Vainamoinen floating in the primeval sea. A water bird landed on his knee. He then moved his leg, causing the egg to break and forming the world. Now that the human world origin has been outlined, it must be noted that the Finns believed in a number of interconnected worlds. First, it must be acknowledged that the belief is there is a great oak that supports the sky dome in all of creation. Between this are three worlds besides the middle human world. These are Lintukoto, Pohjola, and Manala. Lintukoto. This is the upper and ethereal world. Here lives Maria, an old woman who is the guardian of life, childbirth, motherhood, and is the sender of souls. Here also lives the mysterious virgin Iro, who will be discussed further. Despite all of her significance, one of the important positions that Maria holds is being the guardian of water birds, highly significant to the Finns. Migrating water birds are considered the messengers of gods. They travel Linanrata, which translates as the bird's way. This, in our perspective, is actually the Milky Way. It is believed to be a river that flows between worlds and can be traveled by water birds. Surrounded by Sarayas, a massive and freezing ocean, lies Pohjola, the northern place, habited by Laui, the matron of Pohjola. Look for the northern lights, as their glow means that you are near the gates of Pohjola. Within Pohjola, there is a slit in the ground in which the world enters an abyss, and eventually the land of the dead. Located in the center beneath Pohjola is Manala, the land of the dead. It is inhospitable and backwards to the human world in literally every way. Here, Linanrata, or the bird's way, turns around and becomes Tuonenjoki, the river of the land of the dead. It flows from north to south and upwards again, back towards the upper world of Lintukoto. It is here in Lintukoto that the river returns to the spring at the roots of the great oak. From here, it continually flows eternally as the world river, or Linanrata, symbolic of the cycle of life. Now, some important characters will be introduced. The mysterious virgin Iro in Lintukoto gave birth to 3 divine sons, the first being Väinämöinen, who was previously mentioned in the creation story. He is the oldest of the brothers and is associated heavily with water. The second oldest brother is Ilmarinen. He is associated with sky and the wind, and thus smithing and iron. The youngest of the 3 brothers is Youkahainen, who is associated with fire. These are the cosmic gods, and their importance is great. They are considered the gods of nature and its elements, as well as the protectors of culture. Together with water, iron, wind, and fire, they gave birth to civilization. This cultural belief system developed in isolation for a long time, eventually allowing a newly universal Finnish identity among the tribes. Eventually, Swedes began settling islands in the west coast of Finland. Initially, minute involvement was had, and some interbreeding and trade took place. Eventually, the Finns began making contact with seafaring Danes, Germans, and Russians. Soon, Sweden converted to Christianity and was given papal authority to attack, colonize, and Christianize Finland. After a large period of guerrilla war, the Swedes were largely unsuccessful at first, but Finland was eventually forcefully conquered and fortified by their Swedish neighbors. This was known as the Northern Crusades, and Finland was now officially considered Swedish territory. Thus began the desecration of indigenous sites and burial grounds, where atop churches were built. Another instance of colonization took place, this time with the Russians. In an attempt to further Orthodox Christianity, the Russians went on a mass campaign of forced baptism to the Eastern Orthodox Church. The Eastern Karelian Finns were fallen victim to this, eventually being conquered in whole by the Russian Empire. It wouldn't be until 1917 that the Finns would be able to govern themselves once again. Shortly thereafter, Joseph Stalin led a campaign in World War II to attempt to reclaim all of Finland. He was massively repelled, but the losses of the indigenous land cannot be ignored, as Karelia, Petsamo, and many other areas of Finnish heritage were lost and thus Russified. Throughout these trials, Finland was able to retain much of their shamanistic culture. This meant much persecution, as the Swedes were very against spirit worship of animals. Even then, there was many instances of persecution within churches, as the Finns would worship the spirit of the place it once held, and, oftentimes, animals. There are even instances of clergy participating in the Ukko feast, much to the dismay of Swedish church officials. Eventually, Germany brought Lutheranism, and to this day, Finland retains much of that acquisition. Due to centuries of foreign influence and cultural entanglement, the Finns in modernity exhibit habits of isolationism. There is also a strong desire to distance themselves from their colonial past. There have been many movements surrounding this, notably the Fennomen, who say, "Swedes we are not, Russians we won't become. Let us therefore be Finns," a statement that illustrates the people's resentment towards their colonial past. There was also a notable Swedish influence on the very old and unique Finnish language. Swedish is a second language in Finland, but there exists a movement to change this. There also is notably a movement to remove the "å" character from the Finnish language entirely. This is in protest to their Swedish cultural past. Throughout all of this, there are a number of indigenous traditions that have survived the times, one being Johannes, which is the Finnish midsummer. The tradition holds that one must retreat to the nature and lakes, paired with a bonfire, magic, folklore, and sometimes a maypole. Another tradition that survived is the tradition of Noita, in which children dress as quote-unquote witches, going door to door, giving away willow branches adorned with daffodils. This too is accompanied by a bonfire meant to ward off evil spirits. While many are celebratory in nature, some important traditions involve daily life. One, of course, being the sauna, or sauna, as it's known in English. Sauna is one of the oldest and most distinctly Finnish pastimes. The word sauna is even a Proto-Finnish word dating back at least 7,000 years. Though the technology has changed throughout the ages, the tradition has remained. It is a time for a renewal post-labor, stressing the importance of subdued speech, but an evoked mind. Another important piece of cultural preservation is the Kalevala. Compiled by Elias Lönnrot, it features a collection of the Finnish indigenous folklores arranged in a sensible manner. It is the national epic of the Finns, and is an important aspect on educating the youth and common people of their native culture. Today, the Finns retain much of the values that have always defined them as people. Being of a Uralic origin that highly valued the spirits of nature, it is of little wonder how Finland is the European country that holds the largest native forest coverage. Around 74% of the country is this way. From the deepest past and into the furthest future, the Finns will always hold their identity as a rural, peaceful people who will always resist outside encroachment with strength. Forever helping them will be their essential values of spiritualism in nature and to their ancestors. Combined with a culture of self-sufficiency, agriculture, and personal willpower, this is a people whose values promote generational and thus eternal strength.